the shadows of history lie corridors that were never meant to be walked, lined with locked doors and files stamped with a silence more powerful than words. What was burned, buried, or locked away was not just evidence, it was intent. Whispered, code names, sealed compartments, erased transmissions. These fragments, scattered like bones across forgotten archives, suggest a war that never truly ended, a struggle that continues to breathe in classified vaults and half-erased memories. In the final weeks of the Second World War, the German Kriegsmarine was a force in collapse. The once feared U-Boot-Waffe had been decimated by Allied air patrols and advanced anti-submarine tactics. Yet amid the chaos of April 1945, as the Allies closed in on Hamburg and Berlin, a peculiar set of orders was transmitted from Admiral Karl Dönitz's headquarters at Flensburg. Buried within the Kriegsmarine's encrypted Enigma traffic, decoded only in fragments by Allied intelligence, was a directive assigning U-534, an already battered Type 1C-40 U-boat based at Kiel, to a mission under extraordinary secrecy. Its destination was not one of the known Atlantic wolf packs, nor the supply lines toward Norway, but instead a set of coordinates in the Arctic, designated Point Raben. U-534, under the command of Kapitän-Leutnant Herbert Nollau, had survived repeated attacks during 1943-44 but was considered unfit for another Atlantic patrol. Its sudden recommissioning in April raised questions even among its crew. Survivors of the U-boat arm recalled hearing rumors that the vessel had been loaded not with torpedoes or supplies, but with sealed metal canisters overseen directly by officers from the Reichspost Ministerium, a department rarely associated with naval operations. In declassified British intercepts of B-Dienst communications, later examined by the Admiralty's Operational Intelligence Centre, references appear to Hagcylinder and Flüssig material, terms suggesting some form of hazardous cargo. Allied analysts suspected mercury, a key component in experimental propulsion systems being tested by the Luftwaffe for advanced rocket and jet designs. On 5 May 1945, 3 days before Germany's unconditional surrender in Europe, U-534 was spotted leaving Kiel under cover of night, its movements shadowed by Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft. It was last positively identified entering the Skagerrak Strait, pursued intermittently by RAF Liberator bombers flying from Leuchars in Scotland. The Liberators reported depth charge runs against a submerged contact consistent with a Type 9 hull, but post-war reviews of the combat logs show inconsistencies. Some records claimed the target sank in shallow waters. Others noted oil slicks, but no debris. The Admiralty's official loss register listed U-534 as destroyed with total loss of crew, yet within weeks, Danish fishermen reported sonar anomalies north of Anholt Island, and rumors circulated of a surfaced U-boat taken under tow by unidentified ships. For decades, the matter was considered closed, until 1986, when Danish divers rediscovered the wreck of U-534 in relatively intact condition off the coast of Heligoland. When the wreck was raised in 1993 by private salvagers, naval historians were stunned. The hull bore signs not of battle damage, but of internal demolition. Plates on the forward section had been cut outward, as if from inside the vessel, in precise, rectangular sections. The torpedo tubes were empty, and more disturbingly, entire compartments of the storage bay had been stripped clean. Among the recovered artifacts were sealed oxygen bottles, maps of the Arctic sea routes, and fragments of a coded logbook with several pages torn out. No sealed canisters were found. Questions multiplied. If the U-boat had been destroyed by Allied aircraft, why did the wreck display no external damage consistent with depth charges? If the crew had perished, why were no human remains located, nor any evidence of panic within the vessel? Interviews with surviving RAF airmen revealed doubts even at the time. One pilot admitted under oath in 1991 that he never saw the submarine break the surface, and that the kill was logged under pressure from command. In 2005, the British National Archives declassified several ultra-intercepts from Bletchley Park concerning late-war U-boat movements. Among them was a fragmentary decrypt referring to U-534 and Transferfracht nach Rabenstellung. The same file contained a penciled annotation in the margin. Potential connection with Sondergeräte propulsion project, do not circulate. The handwriting has never been definitively attributed. Meanwhile, Soviet records opened after 1991 reveal that the NKVD was aware of U-534's disappearance and believed it had rendezvoused with another vessel in the Norwegian Sea. One NKVD report from Murmansk refers cryptically to the cargo of quicksilver and suggests it was intercepted not by the British, but by neutral intermediaries, possibly Swedish or Spanish agents working with remnants of the Abwehr. Theories proliferated in the following decades. Some suggested U-534 was transporting mercury for the V-2 rocket program, attempting to reach bases in northern Norway to continue missile development under Operation Haunebu, a supposed effort to prolong resistance. Others speculated the U-boat was carrying financial assets, gold, industrial patents, or microfilm archives intended for transfer to sympathetic powers abroad. Yet the physical evidence from the raised wreck supports a narrower, darker possibility that the crew deliberately sabotaged their vessel to conceal the nature of their cargo, removing it at sea before sinking the hull. The fate of U-534's complement remains unresolved. German naval records list the names of 52 men assigned to the submarine in April 1945. None of their bodies were recovered, yet in the 1950s, several sightings were reported of former crewmen living under false identities in Argentina and Chile. British intelligence files from 1957 contain an unconfirmed report of Herbert Nollau residing near Bariloche under the name Hans Bauer. No effort was made to extradite him, and the file was quietly closed. The legacy of U-534 endures as one of the Kriegsmarine's most enduring mysteries. Its wreck lies today in Birkenhead, England, cut into sections for public display, stripped of its secrets. Visitors are shown a preserved conning tower, rusted instruments, and fragments of its Enigma machine. Yet the archival gaps remain glaring. The missing log pages, the vanished cargo, the contradictory reports. To some, U-534 is a symbol of the chaos of Germany's final collapse. To others, it is evidence of a hidden continuity, the transfer of experimental technologies and materials beyond the war's official end. As recently as 2017, a restricted British naval memorandum referenced possible recovery of HG-534 items from Arctic seabed operations, suggesting that even 70 years later, the story of the U-boat that never surfaced is far from over. In the weeks immediately following Germany's surrender, Allied forces scrambled not only to occupy territory, but to secure what the Americans termed special targets, the people, documents, and prototypes that could shape the post-war balance of power. This effort became known as Operation Paperclip, though at the time it was cloaked under a shifting series of euphemisms such as Project Overcast and Special Emigration Program. Officially, the mission was to deny Nazi science to the Soviet Union. Unofficially, it was the wholesale transfer of German technological expertise into American custody, bypassing legal and ethical restrictions. What remains almost entirely forgotten, however, is the case of a single convoy in May 1945 that vanished en route from Bavaria to North America. 4 C-54 Skymaster aircraft carrying Luftwaffe engineers and documents tied to the A9-A10 Intercontinental rocket program. The paper trail begins at Lechfeld Air Base, southwest of Augsburg, where remnants of Jagdverband 44, General Adolf Gallen's squadron of experts, had recently surrendered. Alongside Me-262 jet fighters, Allied forces found a cache of rocket documentation stamped with the insignia of the Forschungszentrum Peenemünde. These were no ordinary V2 schematics. Among them were references to Fernrakete A9-A10, a 2-stage ballistic missile designed to reach targets across the Atlantic, specifically New York and Washington. Witness testimony collected by the US Army's Technical Intelligence Unit indicated that test flights had been envisioned for early 1946. The documents were considered so sensitive that according to a declassified 1946 memorandum from the U.S. Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA, they were to bypass ordinary chain of custody. On 18 May 1945, 4 C-54s departed from Lechfeld, their manifests listing crates of technical files, dismantled engine parts, and 27 German scientists under guard. The lead aircraft, tail number 4272777, was assigned to Colonel Donald L. Putt, a senior Air Technical Service Command officer, later associated with nuclear weapons development at Sandia Base. From Lechfeld, the convoy staged through Orly Field, in Paris, then Shannon, Ireland, before filing onward to Gander, Newfoundland, the standard ferry route for long-range aircraft. At Orly, flight control logs record all 4 departures. At Shannon, only 3 are confirmed as landed. By the time the convoy was due to report from Gander on 20th May, only 2 aircraft had arrived. The missing 2 were never accounted for in official flight logs. The official explanation, repeated in later Air Force summaries, is that the aircraft lost over the Atlantic were carrying only technical scrap and no key personnel. Yet inspection of contemporary documents paints a different picture. In a War Department G2 report dated 24th May 1945, the missing aircraft are described as carrying engineering personnel of the Peenemünde Long Range Weapons Bureau. A later memorandum from General Curtis LeMay, then commanding U.S. strategic air forces in Europe, noted the urgent necessity to retrieve lost material, presumed ditched. Strikingly, no search and rescue records exist. Neither the U.S. Navy nor the Royal Canadian Air Force reported conducting patrols along the route. Survivors, debris, or flight beacons were never found. The Soviets, however, appeared to know more. In 1992, after the collapse of the USSR, fragments of NKVD intelligence reports surfaced in Moscow archives. One dated July 1946, addressed to Lavrenti Beria, referred to the American disappearance of 2 transport aircraft containing the A9-A10 apparatus. The report speculated that the planes had not been lost, but deliberately diverted. A handwritten note in the margin, signed only K, stated, "Possible Argentine channel. Verify with GRU assets in Buenos Aires." The suggestion that German scientists or documents might have been rerouted to South America echoes persistent post-war rumors of clandestine Nazi escapes facilitated by sympathizers abroad. Personnel files add to the mystery. Of the 27 German scientists listed in the Lechfeld transport orders, only 18 appear in subsequent US custody rosters. The missing names include Dr. Kurt Patt, an aerodynamics specialist, and Hans Hermann Walker, a structural engineer who later re-emerged in Argentina working on aircraft for Fábrica Militar de Aviones. American JIOA records are silent on their absence. When the discrepancy was raised in a 1952 congressional hearing on Operation Paperclip, witnesses claimed duplicate names had been confused in the lists, an explanation that did little to satisfy critics. Perhaps most telling are the redactions in US Air Force archives. In the accession files for 4272777, several pages are entirely blacked out under exemption B-1, National Defense. The visible entries stop abruptly after Shannon, Ireland, May 19, 1945. Handwritten in the margin of one unredacted page is the phrase "material returned via alternate channel." No clarification is provided. The surviving 2 aircraft that did reach Gander were quietly integrated into the broader Paperclip transfer pipeline, their cargo distributed to Fort Bliss, Texas, and White Sands Proving Ground in New Mexico. There, German scientists began work on what would become the Redstone missile program. In post-war West Germany, rumors of the forgotten Convoy persisted among veterans of the Luftwaffe's rocket program. One former engineer, interrogated by British intelligence in 1947, recalled being told that a group of comrades had flown west, but the planes turned south. When pressed, he claimed that an SS officer had mentioned continuing the work where it could not be stopped. The statement was dismissed at the time as disinformation. Yet the appearance of Waka in Argentina lends weight to the possibility that at least some passengers reached South America. What then was aboard those aircraft? Some historians suggest merely duplicate files already seized at Nordhausen and Mittelwerk. Others argue that intact components of the A-10 engine, the massive booster stage required for intercontinental flight, were spirited away. A classified British Air Ministry note from 1946 speculated that the Americans had successfully concealed the acquisition of such components, explaining their subsequent leap in high-thrust liquid propulsion technology. A more conspiratorial reading points to a US cover-up, that the disappearance of two aircraft provided plausible deniability for diverting material to projects too politically sensitive to acknowledge, such as early intercontinental missile research or even nuclear warhead integration studies. By the 1960s, the official narrative had ossified. The Air Force listed the missing aircraft as presumed lost at sea. No further comment. The surviving German scientists of Paperclip remained publicly celebrated for their contributions to NASA and the US missile program. Yet the missing names linger, as do the unexplained gaps in the records. In 2010, researchers petitioned the US National Archives for declassification of the full Convoy manifests. The request was denied, citing ongoing national security concerns. What, after 70 years, could still warrant secrecy? The story of Operation Paperclip's forgotten convoy illustrates the murky frontier between historical fact and classified shadow. Official records tell of two aircraft lost to the Atlantic, their cargo irrelevant. Unofficial fragments, Soviet intelligence, redacted memos, missing personnel suggest a deliberate erasure. Whether the truth lies at the bottom of the ocean or hidden in sealed vaults remains unknown. But one fact is inescapable. Somewhere between Lechfeld and Gander, an entire chapter of the Second World War's technological aftermath simply vanished, leaving behind only silence, suspicion, and the faint echo of engines that never landed. When Allied bombers reduced Dresden to rubble in February 1945, the firestorm was assumed to have obliterated all industrial and scientific facilities in the city. Yet in the suburb of Zschachwitz, hidden behind inconspicuous warehouses along the Elbe, the SS had operated what appeared to be a minor technical school. In reality, the Technische Akademie Zschachwitz was a satellite site for the Reich's most secret weapons research. Intelligence fragments later revealed it housed a program codenamed Project Thor, an effort to assemble composite uranium warheads for long-range artillery. The site survived the firestorm, protected by its underground vaults, until Soviet troops overran Dresden in May. By then, much of the paper trail had already vanished into Allied custody, only to disappear once again in the years that followed. The Academy's existence first surfaced in a captured Wehrmacht communication, decrypted by the British Y Service in March 1945. The message referred to Thor Versuche, Zschachwitz, and mentioned a delivery of Kern material. Analysts at Bletchley Park debated whether the term referred to uranium ore or fabricated components. At the same time, US T-Force units, the special intelligence gathering teams attached to frontline divisions, had been ordered to prioritize seizure of all German nuclear research. When American forces briefly occupied Dresden in July 1945, they uncovered the remnants of the Zschachwitz facility, sealed concrete bunkers, machine tools adapted for precision metallurgy, and dozens of crates of technical documents. An inventory prepared by Captain Robert E. Bunger of the 16921st Technical Intelligence Unit lists 42 crates of files designated Zthor 1 through Zthor 42, shipped to London for examination by the British Ministry of Supply. The files included schematic drawings of modified 28 Scimitar K5 railway guns, adapted to fire shells with composite uranium cores, and theoretical notes on radiological dispersal effects. While the science was primitive compared to the Manhattan Project, Allied analysts were alarmed that the Germans had pursued such a program at all. One War Office memorandum, dated 18th September 1945, notes, "If realized, Thor munitions would constitute a terror weapon of unprecedented magnitude, capable of rendering urban centers uninhabitable. Yet beyond 1946, all trace of the Thor files evaporates. The crates were logged as received at Woolwich Arsenal, but subsequent entries in the War Office catalogue mark them as misfiled. No copies exist in the National Archives, nor in the declassified US records of Operation Alsos. The trail resurfaced briefly in 1994, when a single page stamped with both a British Crown watermark and a Soviet catalogue number was discovered in the Bundesarchiv in Koblenz. The page described Abwurfkörper Thor B and bore handwritten notes in Cyrillic. This suggests the files were not destroyed, but transferred or stolen during the early Cold War intelligence rivalry. How the documents could bear markings of both Western and Soviet custody remains unexplained. Some historians argue the British quietly bartered segments of the archive in exchange for access to Soviet-held German scientists. Others suspect infiltration, that Soviet agents within the Ministry of Supply accessed and duplicated the Thor files before their supposed disappearance. Eyewitness testimony complicates matters further. Former forced laborers from the Zschachwitz site, interviewed in the 1960s, recalled handling unusual cylindrical casings described by overseers as Sondergranaten. They believed these were test shells for the Thor program, though none were ever recovered intact. A French officer attached to Operation Harborage claimed in 1947 that several crates from Dresden had been diverted to Strasbourg before reaching London. His report was dismissed as hearsay. Yet in 2003, researchers at the International Tracing Service uncovered correspondence suggesting that French intelligence had indeed retained a portion of the Zschachwitz archive until at least 1950. What is known with certainty is that by the late 1940s, both East and West were engaged in selective erasure. For the British, acknowledging the existence of Thor raised uncomfortable questions about how close Germany had come to radiological weapons and why the files had not been safeguarded. For the Soviets, revealing their possession of Thor material risked exposing espionage channels within Allied ranks. By 1952, references to Thor vanish entirely from official discourse. Even historians with full access to Ministry of Defense archives in the 1970s reported encountering gaps where catalogue numbers jumped inexplicably, the absence justified with vague notations of loss during reorganization. Speculation thrives in these silences. Some argue the Thor files were destroyed deliberately, their contents deemed too dangerous to survive in any archive. Others maintain they were subsumed into classified nuclear weapons programs in both East and West, providing a foundation for early radiological warfare research. A handful of conspiracy theorists suggest the files were spirited away by former SS officers who escaped to South America, though no direct evidence supports this. The lone page at the Bundesarchiv, however, demonstrates that the files did exist, were catalogued, and were handled by more than one occupying power. The story of the Dresden-Zschachwitz files underscores the fragility of wartime records and the ease with which history can be edited by omission. A program that, if completed, might have produced the world's first dirty bomb vanished not in the chaos of war, but in the careful bureaucratic handling of peace. The crates labelled Zethor 1 through Zethor 42 passed through Allied hands, were logged, sealed, and then, without explanation, erased from the ledger. What remains are fragments, a British memo warning of uninhabitable cities, a Soviet catalogue stamp, survivor recollections of strange shells, and a haunting absence in the archives where 42 crates should be. Whether Thor was ever more than a desperate, paper project in the dying months of the Reich is impossible to say with certainty. Yet the disappearance of its files suggests something more, that the Allies considered the material too valuable or too damning to allow public scrutiny. To this day, researchers seeking the Thor records encounter the same response. Misfiled. In the world of classified history, such a word often means only one thing: deliberately buried. When the Soviet Union launched Operation August Storm in August 1945, sweeping into Japanese-held Manchuria, they encountered more than the shattered remnants of the Kwantung Army. Among the spoils of war were strange aircraft parked at airfields. Near Changchun and Harbin, Machines the Red Army Air Force photographers identified as heavily modified Ki-77 long-range aircraft, with twin fuselages joined by a central wing. Unlike the standard Ki-77, a transport used in record-breaking flights before the war, these bore extended fuel tanks, experimental engines, and reinforced cockpits for high-altitude operations. Soviet archives declassified in the 1990s contain photographs labeled Особая серия, Special Series, showing at least 5 such aircraft lined up in the dust of Manchurian runways, some still bearing hastily applied Japanese Hinomaru insignia. The Japanese codename for the program, according to interrogations conducted at Khabarovsk in December 1945, was Tokushu Kenkyu Daitai, Special Research Unit. Its stated mission was not tactical combat, but strategic reach, ferrying envoys, documents, and possibly high-value passengers across the Pacific to sympathetic nations. Argentina, a neutral country until late in the war, appears repeatedly in these interrogations. Captain Hiroshi Shimizu, a test pilot questioned by the Soviets, described plans for direct flights across the ocean to South America and noted that the aircraft carried navigation instruments, far more advanced than standard Imperial Japanese Army equipment. His testimony was entered into the Khabarovsk War Crimes Trials transcripts, but redacted in the published proceedings. American intelligence was not unaware. A declassified OSS memorandum dated 14th of September 1945, titled Unusual Aircraft in Manchuria, references Soviet reports of twin fuselage Ki-77s and warns, if confirmed, such aircraft indicate Japanese preparations for transoceanic liaison post-surrender. The memo was marked Eyes Only, WDC, and filed under FARD's East Division Archives. Curiously, the War Department's public record of captured Japanese aircraft makes no mention of the type, instead focusing on better-known experimental models like the Kika jet and the Ki-83 heavy fighter. This omission suggests deliberate concealment. What became of the Manchurian squadron after the Soviet capture remains murky. The photographic record ends abruptly in September 1945, with no further mention in Soviet aviation journals or intelligence summaries. Yet local testimony complicates the picture. Chinese villagers in Heilongjiang province interviewed decades later claimed that, in the autumn months following the surrender, large planes with 2 bodies flew overhead at night for 3 consecutive days, heading eastward toward the Pacific. Their accounts are consistent with the appearance of the Ki-77 variants and suggest at least some aircraft were operational and airborne well after Japan's capitulation. The lack of wreckage is particularly striking. The Soviets scrapped or tested nearly every Japanese aircraft captured in Manchuria, yet no remains of the twin fuselage Ki-77s were ever catalogued. Unlike the Ki-84s or Ki-61s, which were transported to Moscow for evaluation, these aircraft seem to have vanished entirely. One Soviet engineer's private diary, recovered from his family after his death in 1978, notes, "Special planes sent elsewhere. Not for us." The entry, dated October 1945, has fueled speculation that the squadron was flown out under secret arrangements, possibly involving American cooperation in the chaotic overlap of Soviet and Allied zones of influence in East Asia. By 1946, rumors spread through US occupation forces in Japan that high-ranking officials of the wartime government had escaped by air, avoiding both Soviet capture and Allied tribunals. The supposed Ghost Squadron of Manchuria became part of this law. Argentine immigration records do show unexplained spikes in arrivals of Japanese nationals in 1946–47, many using falsified or incomplete documentation. While most were likely ordinary civilians or repatriates, the overlap with the Ghost Squadron rumors is notable. A classified 1948 State Department cable from Buenos Aires reported persistent local claims that Japanese aviators with special aircraft had landed secretly in Patagonia, though no physical evidence was produced. What purpose would such flights have served? The surviving Japanese engineers told the Soviets that the project was meant as a diplomatic bridge, a way to maintain contact with potential allies after the anticipated Allied invasion of the home islands. Some Allied intelligence officers, later speculated that the aircraft were intended to evacuate elements of Japan's wartime leadership, or to transport sensitive archives and experimental data to sympathetic nations abroad. Others suspected more pragmatic motives, the ferrying of industrial diamonds, currency, or even uranium oxide, of which Japan had modest stockpiles through its contacts with Germany. None of these possibilities can be confirmed, but the operational design of the aircraft, extraordinary range, heavy reinforcement, dual fuselages for stability, suggests missions far beyond ordinary transport. The story faded from public consciousness during the Cold War, buried beneath the larger narrative of atomic bombs and occupation reforms. The Soviets never publicly acknowledged the capture of the aircraft, and American files remain heavily redacted. Only scattered fragments, an OSS memo, photographs labeled Special Series, and a few haunting testimonies from villagers remain to suggest the squadron's existence. In 2001, Japanese aviation historians petitioned the Russian government for access to any surviving wreckage or files. The official response was that no such materials are held in Russian Federation archives. Privately, one archivist admitted to researchers, if the files existed, they were removed long ago. The ghost squadron of Manchuria remains a historical void. Planes photographed on the ground, witnessed in flight, then erased. Their disappearance fits a larger pattern of wartime aviation mysteries, where technology and personnel crossed borders in the confusion of surrender and occupation. Unlike Germany's V weapons, which left concrete ruins and extensive paper trails, the Japanese program at Zschachwitz and its alleged successors left almost nothing. What is known is that at the end of the war, in a devastated corner of Manchuria, aircraft capable of transoceanic flight stood ready on the runway. What is not known is where they went, who flew them, and what they carried into the night skies of 1945. In May 1945, while most of Europe celebrated Germany's surrender, a select Allied task force pushed deep into the Black Forest under orders of utmost secrecy. The operation, codenamed Harborage, was executed by elements of the US 6th Army, group with French intelligence units attached. Its stated objective was the seizure of German nuclear research and industrial facilities before they could be overrun by advancing Soviet forces. Officially, Harborage resulted in the capture of uranium cubes, experimental reactors, and leading scientists such as Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker and Karl Wirtz. Unofficially, however, the operation uncovered something darker, evidence of conversations between scientists and SS officials recorded on magnetic audio reels, referred to in declassified French memos as Versuchssaal 3 Stimmenprotokoll. These so-called lost tapes were shipped to Strasbourg, then vanished en route to Paris. Their fate remains one of the Cold War's most elusive mysteries. The first reference to the tapes appears in a debriefing note by Colonel Boris Pash, commander of the Alsos mission, dated 15th May 1945. Pash noted, recovered at Heigerloch facility, reactor components, heavy water, and evidence of voice recordings, German origin, requiring technical review. At the time, magnetic tape technology was still experimental. Developed by AEG under the magnetophone system, it was far superior to Allied wire recorders. That German scientists may have recorded high-level discussions of nuclear weapons strategy on such media was startling. The Alsos report suggested the tapes contained direct conversations between Werner Heisenberg, Walther Gerlach, and SS liaisons tasked with overseeing nuclear projects. If true, these recordings could have provided unfiltered insight into Nazi intentions regarding radiological weapons. French involvement complicates the story. As Harborage forces advanced into the Württemberg area, French T-Force units took custody of certain materials independently of the Americans. A declassified 1946 French military memorandum, catalogued in the archives of the Service Historique de la Défense, describes reels of magnetophone tape, recovered from laboratory designated Versuchssaal 3. The memo warns, contents include discussions implicating high-level political authority in development of unconventional weapons, custody to remain provisional. The tapes were logged onto a Convoy manifest bound for Strasbourg. yet no subsequent record exists of their arrival in Paris. Within months, French authorities denied knowledge of any such reels. The CIA later stumbled upon references to the tapes in its early years. A 1952 memorandum from the Office of Scientific Intelligence, now declassified in part, refers cryptically to magnetic reels seized in Württemberg, 1945, currently retained at undisclosed NATO facility, access restricted beyond standard clearance. The memo does not specify location or custodian, but the phrase undisclosed NATO facility suggests the tapes had been absorbed into Cold War intelligence infrastructure, far removed from their original Alsos context. By the late 1950s, no mention of them appeared in either US or French official channels. Testimony from scientists themselves raises further intrigue. In post-war interviews, Heisenberg consistently denied that he or his colleagues had seriously pursued a German atomic bomb. Yet in 1946, during the famous Farm Hall recordings in England, he made statements that seemed to contradict his wartime testimony. If the Versuchssaal tapes contained candid wartime discussions, they might have revealed whether Heisenberg's denials were disingenuous, or whether the SS pressured the scientists into exploring radiological or nuclear weapons applications more aggressively than admitted. The mere possibility that such evidence existed would have been politically explosive in the fragile early years of the Cold War. Speculation about the tapes intensified in the 1970s, when a retired French intelligence officer gave a closed interview to a German journalist. The officer, speaking anonymously, claimed that he had personally transported 3 reels from Haigerloch to Strasbourg in May 1945. He recalled hearing fragments of playback, including references to Einsatzfähigkeit, operational capability, and Befehle vom Reichsführer. If accurate, this would implicate Heinrich Himmler himself in the oversight of nuclear discussions. The officer alleged the tapes were removed from Strasbourg by American personnel without French authorization and flown to Frankfurt. The claim cannot be verified, but it dovetails with gaps in the French custody record. The technical significance of the tapes should not be understated. Magnetophone reels of the 1940s were fragile, easily degraded, and required specialized playback machines. The Germans had pioneered stereo recording and long-duration reels, making it conceivable that hours of high-level discussions could have been preserved. If analyzed today, the tapes would provide primary source evidence of the Reich's nuclear program intentions, evidence currently obscured by conflicting post-war narratives. The US had strong incentive to monopolize such material, both to assess potential threats and to control the historical record. The Soviets, who captured vast paper archives of German research, never claimed to possess the tapes, perhaps indicating they were successfully concealed by the Western Allies. What little certainty exists comes from gaps in the archive. The Alsos final report mentions voice recordings in one section, then omits them entirely from subsequent appendices. French files contain a single manifest entry listing magnetophone reels Versuchssaal 3, with the word mislaid penciled in months later. CIA memoranda confirm continued existence at least into the early 1950s. After that, silence. Whether the tapes were destroyed, degraded, or remain hidden in some classified NATO archive is unknown. For historians, the loss of the Versuchssaal tapes represents more than missing evidence. It is a reminder of how deliberately the post-war narrative of German science was shaped. By presenting Heisenberg and his colleagues as disinterested academics, the West could portray the nuclear race as an exclusively American and Soviet duel. Any suggestion that Nazi Germany came closer to a usable weapon, or that its scientists engaged more actively with the SS, would have complicated that narrative. For the French, possession of such evidence might have bolstered their claim to a seat among the world's nuclear powers. For the Americans, controlling or suppressing it ensured strategic advantage. 70 years later, the trail remains cold. Inquiries to NATO archives yield denials. French military historians speak of holes in the record. The Bundesarchiv in Germany holds nothing but references to missing crates. The only tangible proof lies in a handful of memos, a vanished Convoy manifest, and the words Versuchssaal 3 Stimmenprotokoll. If the tapes ever resurface, they could alter the understanding of Germany's wartime nuclear ambitions and expose uncomfortable truths about Allied secrecy in the years that followed. Until then, they remain an enigma, lost not in the chaos of war, but in the deliberate shadows of the peace that came after. The documents end, but the silence does not. Somewhere behind redacted lines and missing reels, truths still coil like wires sparking in the dark. They are fragments of an unfinished war, maps without destinations, voices caught between erasure and survival. Perhaps they remain hidden because they are too dangerous, or perhaps because they are too revealing. What is buried is not gone. It waits, patient, beneath the weight of secrecy, daring us to dig deeper.